Hey guys, tonight we slip into a pair of splintery wooden clogs, tug a lice-bitten hood over our ears, and step outside into a fog-drenched medieval morning. The chickens are louder than they should be, the privy's already frozen over, and that weird ache in your ribs, probably just the start of something awful. You take a breath. It smells like smoke, wet hay, and whatever the pig dragged in, which could have been your dinner. You stand in the center of a village barely worth a name, just a handful of wattle and daub huts, some crooked fences, a sagging church bell, and dirt. So much dirt. Dirt on your tunic, dirt under your nails, dirt in your mouth. You blink. Someone nearby is already coughing up what sounds like a lung, and it's only Tuesday. You probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and what time it is where you are. I love seeing where you're all tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge down a path more mud than road. A duck gives you the side eye. You stare back. At least the duck's dry. A donkey brays like it's seen the abyss, and maybe it has. Life here, 14th century England, give or take a plague, isn't about thriving. It's about not dying before the sun sets. You rise before dawn. You sleep after dark. And every day in between is a gamble against disease, hunger, or the wrath of a noble who thinks your turnips are somehow his. You're a peasant, but not all peasants are created equal. You could be a villain, tied to the land like a cow on a short rope. Can't leave. Can't marry without your lord's blessing. You work his fields, pay your dues, and in return, you get not much. Or maybe you're a cotter, lower still, lucky to scrape together a patch of earth and a goat with commitment issues. At the bottom, the boarders, landless labourers who live off scraps and rumours. Social mobility, only if someone drops dead in your general direction. Still, you keep going. You've got a family to feed. 3 kids, one of whom might be yours, a spouse who's chewing on boiled barley like it's a steak, and an old uncle who insists he once saw a mermaid in the well. You don't argue, not anymore. The morning bell clangs. Church time. Again. You shuffle in with the rest of the village, pretending not to notice that Brother Hugh smells like fermented turnip. The priest drones on about sin, and you try not to fall asleep. But it's warm in here, and your stomach's been eating itself since yesterday. You daydream about bread, not even fresh bread, just bread that doesn't crunch like gravel. Historians still argue whether peasants truly accepted their lot, or merely endured it in resigned defiance. Some records suggest deep piety and communal loyalty. Others hint at quiet resentment bubbling just beneath the dirt. Either way, you nod along with the sermon and mumble your prayers. Heaven may not have clean water, but at least it's not here. Back home, your hovel leans a little more to the left each week. The roof's thatch is home to 3 generations of mice, and the door is more suggestion than structure. Inside, a central hearth smokes up the room. No chimney here, just a small hole where warmth escapes faster than you can boil soup. You sit on a stool made from an upside-down bucket. Your toes tingle. Could be frostbite, could be a rat's nibble. You don't check. Lunchtime arrives with no fanfare. You dip a chunk of crust into some thin broth, frown at a mystery leaf floating on top, and eat anyway. It tastes like everything and nothing. Your youngest wipes their nose on your sleeve, again. And yet, between the drudgery and damp, there's rhythm, predictability, some odd comfort. You know which birds wake first. You know when the village dog will bark at ghosts. And you know that tomorrow, if nothing worse happens, you'll do it all again. But don't get too cozy. Rumor has it something's brewing in the next village over. A cough, a rash, maybe a death or two. You hear whispers. One traveler said a merchant died mid-sentence at the market. Another claims the baker's wife bled from her eyes. You scoff. Superstition, probably. Still, you keep your distance. You toss a log into the hearth. Sparks fly. A little drama in an otherwise grey evening. Someone outside is singing, off-key but with feeling. The sky turns purple, then black. Stars flicker. You lie down on the hard-packed floor beside your family, bones aching, dreams thin. Tonight you sleep. If luck holds, tomorrow you survive. If not, well, there's always purgatory. You wake to a rooster that sounds more like a drunk cousin shouting into a bucket. The sky is still dark, with just a hint of orange bruising the horizon. Your joints argue as you stand. Everything cracks. Knees, back, neck, probably even your spirit. The hearth's gone cold. Someone snored the fire out again. You shuffle through the ashes, nursing your fingers close to the last ember, coaxing it to life with a twig and a whispered prayer to St. Lawrence, patron saint of cooks and, ironically, grilled things. You'd laugh, but it's too early. Outside, the village comes alive in its own creaky way. Chickens argue over the same scrap of beet. Someone's already yelling at a goat. And just beyond your fence, made of more hope than wood, a neighbor is relieving himself with the carefree confidence of a man whose forgotten privacy exists. It doesn't. Not really. Now, before you grab your scythe, or hoe, or that weird rake someone gave you last harvest, you stretch. You need your body. It's the only tool you have. No one cares how smart you are, or how well you recite psalms. If your hands can't swing, dig, carry, or knead, you don't eat. But don't mistake all peasants for poor and nameless. There's a whole twisted pecking order in the mud. You, dear listener, are somewhere in the middle, a smallholder. You've got a couple of acres, a bad-tempered pig, and one decent tunic for Sundays. You're not tied to a manor, but don't get cocky. Your land is still beholden to a lord's demands, and every harvest comes with strings attached, taxes, tithes, and gifts that aren't really gifts at all. Above you stands the reeve, a peasant like you, but with just enough status to make him annoying. He tracks who ploughed what, when, and how deeply. Miss your quota, he'll report it. Beat your neighbour's yield, he'll probably still report it. Historians still argue whether reeves were trusted or resented. Records show both respect and occasional beatings. Depends on how often they forgot who owed what. Then there's the bailiff, the lord's errand boy with a stick and a love of inventory. He rides in from the manor, lists things loudly, and sometimes takes your last chicken to settle a debt. No one likes the bailiff, not even the chickens. And let's not forget the manorial court, which meets under a big tree or inside the grain barn when it rains. You show up with your cap in hand and hope the fine is less than your rent. Did your goat wander into the Lord's barley? That'll cost you. Did your son throw mud at the reeve's daughter? Double. Say sorry, then triple it. Your social world is tight. 80, maybe 100 people in the village, most related, all noisy. You know everyone's business, and they know yours. When someone gets sick, the whole village knows before breakfast. When someone disappears, well, let's just say accidents happen near deep wells. You eye your neighbour Marjorie. She's churning butter like it owes her money. Rumour is she's part Norman, whatever that means now. Her husband went to war 4 years ago and hasn't come back. People whisper she's cursed. You wave anyway. She doesn't wave back. But the day doesn't wait for drama. You grab your tools and trudge to the field. If you're lucky, you've got a strip of land, not a cosy square, but long, thin rows stretching out like ribbons. This was the open field system, and it's your daily proving ground. No fences, no privacy. You plough next to your neighbour, cursing the same rocks and praying the same sky doesn't open up and ruin everything. And let's talk ploughing. If you've got an ox, congratulations, you're basically rich. If not, you're the ox. Your shoulders do the work. And let's just say medieval ploughs weren't exactly ergonomic. You push, you sweat, you curse under your breath. And still, the soil barely gives. Lunch is a humble affair. Bread if you're lucky, dried peas if you're not, and something pickled to scare off scurvy. You sit on a lump of earth, trade insults with a friend, and try not to fall asleep mid-chew. But sometimes, just sometimes, you pause. The field glows gold. A bird lands nearby. The wind carries the scent of honeysuckle. And for a moment, it doesn't feel so bad. Then the wind shifts and brings the smell of the tanner's pit. Moment over. Now, in your village, not everyone farms. There's a miller, always suspect of skimming extra flour. A blacksmith, with arms like tree trunks, and a wife who secretly brews the best ale. And the herdsman, who insists he can speak to cows. You believe him, mostly because his cows seem unnaturally obedient. There are festivals too, not many, not often, but when they happen, you let loose. You drink, you dance, you try to forget your back pain. Sometimes there's a juggler. Once there was a bear, it bit someone. Good times. But fun has limits. You can't get too rowdy, or the reeve finds you for disturbing the order. Someone always ruins it. Usually the same someone. By sundown, you're back home, muscles aching, hair full of field dust. The stew's thin but warm. The fire crackles. Your oldest tells a joke you've heard 5 times, and you laugh anyway, because laughter's rare and precious. You lie down beside your family, exhausted. Through a gap in the roof, you watch the stars. They feel impossibly far. You wonder what's beyond them. Then your youngest farts loudly and ruins the moment. Some things never change. You wake up chewing. It takes a moment to realize it's not a dream. You've actually fallen asleep with a hunk of yesterday's bread still in your mouth. Not that it matters. The bread's so stale, it could double as building material. You swallow it anyway, because you're hungry and because your morning options are limited. Welcome to breakfast, peasant style. There's no bacon sizzling, no coffee brewing. Instead, your choices include cold porridge, crusty bread, maybe a little cheese if the mouse didn't beat you to it. And yes, sometimes you get lucky and spot an egg, still warm, if you're fast and the chicken's in a good mood. You tear off a chunk of bread and dip it into something grey and wet. It's called pottage, a vague and endlessly flexible stew that tastes like whatever went into it and whatever fell into it. On good days, it's barley, beans, and bits of cabbage. On bad days, you try not to ask. Still, you eat, slowly, carefully, because there's no dentist, and if you chip a tooth, that's basically a death sentence for chewing. One monk once wrote about a peasant who lived off boiled leeks for 4 years after a molar cracked. Legend? Maybe, but not impossible. You chew, you swallow, you try to convince yourself this is filling. Historians still argue whether the medieval diet was truly as dismal as it sounds. Some records show surprising nutritional balance: grains, legumes, leafy greens. Others paint a bleaker picture of near starvation, endless flat beer, and the occasional rat cooked in desperation. Either way, you're not eating for flavor, you're eating for fuel. And let's not forget the centerpiece of your diet: bread, black bread, rough, heavy, full of bran, grit, and sometimes pebbles from poorly ground flour. You develop what the nobles mockingly call peasant jaw, a thick, muscled bite from years of chewing food that fights back. To drink? No clean water, sorry. You pour yourself a clay cup of ale, weak, flat, and brewed by your neighbor Agnes, who swears her secret ingredient is thyme. You suspect it's not, but it doesn't kill you, and that's the point. Kids slurp their gruel and chase each other around the hearth. You swat one with a wooden spoon, not in anger, just ritual. Now, breakfast may be simple, but it's sacred. It's the only guaranteed meal of the day. Dinner might happen, or not. Depends on the weather, the crop, the mood of the bailiff, or whether the firewood is dry enough to even cook something. You step outside with a belly half full and expectations set to low. The village smells like damp wool and wet dog. That's normal. A breeze brings the scent of onions. Also normal. And somewhere nearby, someone is already burning something that shouldn't be burned. Possibly boots, possibly dung. You try not to inhale too deeply. The village baker passes by, apron dusted in flour, looking like a walking loaf. His name's Will. He's always angry about something. This time it's the new grain prices. They've gone up. Again. You nod in sympathy and pretend to care, but in truth, you're mostly worried about whether your own rye has gone moldy. Mold is tricky. Sometimes it's white and soft. Sometimes it's green and hallucinogenic. And sometimes it just stares back at you. As you make your way to the fields, your neighbor's pig joins you. You call him Sir Oinks-a-lot. He doesn't respond to the name, but he does follow you. He's probably smarter than most of your family, and you're 90% sure he knows it. Mid-morning is for chores, grueling, muddy, often absurd. Today, you dig up leaks, milk a goat with commitment issues, and chase down a chicken that's somehow perched on your roof beam. Again, the sun climbs, and with it comes hunger, again. You duck into the shade and nibble a bit of dried apple. It's chewy, sharp, and tastes faintly of dust, but it's enough to keep you upright. A young boy nearby holds out a mushroom and asks if it's edible. You say, "Depends on if you want to see angels or just die slowly." He eats it anyway. Kids are fearless, or just bored. Fringe fact of the day. Some peasants believed that mushrooms growing near graves were sacred, and eating them could bring visions of lost loved ones. Others believed they were the devil's parasols. Either way, eating them was a gamble. The church bell rings, not for mass, just noon. Time to bow your head and mutter a prayer. You whisper thanks for the sun, the bread, and that your back hasn't snapped yet. Also, you ask for fewer fleas tonight. You're not picky, just realistic. Back home, you check the food stores. Not much left. Some dried beans, a few shriveled onions, a pot of lard that's seen better days. And bread. Always bread. You take out a chunk and knock it against the table. It doesn't break. You soak it in broth, turning it into something called soaps. Soaked bread mush. Sounds awful. Is awful. But it fills you, sort of. You eat in silence, chewing each bite exactly 20 times. Not for digestion, just to feel like it's a real meal. Evening approaches. You feed the fire. You light a tallow candle. Cheap, smelly, made from animal fat, and guaranteed to make everything you own smell faintly of bacon. You don't mind. It's a smell you understand. You sit on your stool. Your spouse slices a bit of hard cheese with a knife passed down from your grandfather. The blade is dull, the handle worn smooth. You both pretend not to notice the mold creeping in from one edge. It's fine. Probably. Some nights, if there's time, you share a communal pot of stew with neighbors. You all dip your spoons, make quiet jokes, and listen to old Marjorie rant about the price of salt. Someone starts humming a song about St. Dunstan tricking the devil. Everyone joins in. This quiet moment of warmth, of shared struggle, of food passed hand to hand, is the closest thing to wealth you'll ever know. And then Sir Oinks-a-lot farts so loudly that someone drops their spoon. So ends dinner. You lie down, stomach not quite full, but not empty either. You're grateful. You've had worse. Your breath settles. You fall asleep with the taste of onions in your mouth and the faint hope of eggs tomorrow. You wake up scratching, again. The itch starts at your ankle, crawls up to your knee, then dives under your tunic like it's paying rent. You fling off the blanket, if you can even call a burlap sack with dreams of grandeur a blanket, and squint up at your ceiling. It's alive, not metaphorically, literally. Your thatched roof is twitching. Tiny legs skitter. A beetle drops onto your chest and gives you a look like, "What? You live here too." You sigh and flick it off. Somewhere in the straw above, mice are hosting their annual banquet. Probably dancing, probably breeding. Welcome to Home Sweet Hovel. Your house, like every other peasant's, is made of wattle and daub. Thin wooden slats woven together and caked with mud, dung, straw, and blind optimism. The roof is thatch. Bundles of dry reeds stacked so thick they hold out rain for about 3 months. After that, they mostly hold moisture, mildew, and every bug with a dream. You roll over and catch a face full of smoke. The hearth still smoulders. That's the design, believe it or not. With no chimney, the smoke curls up into the rafters and leaks out through the thatch, seasoning everything you own in eau de bonfire. Your tunic, your bread, your hair, all faintly smoked. It's less charming than it sounds. You cough, wipe your nose, and shuffle toward the door, really just a loose wooden slab wedged into the frame like a shrug. You unlatch it, and the entire wall creaks like it's questioning your life choices. Outside, the sun is trying, pale and watery, like yesterday's stew. The village stirs. A sheep wanders by and sniffs your boot. You nod like old friends. Back inside, your furniture consists of a few three-legged stools, a bench with one nail too many poking out of it, and a table with dreams of being level. Everything is multi-purpose. The same table is where you eat, gut fish, patch shoes, and once, memorably, gave birth. Well, not you personally, but you were there. Someone fainted. There's one room, just one. You all sleep in it, eat in it, argue in it. There might be a curtain for modesty if you're fancy. If not, you've got a privacy zone in the corner, which is really just a basket turned upside down. The toilet? Nature. Or a privy out back. A hole in the ground with a wooden seat and the worst smell this side of the afterlife. If it's winter, you hold it. If it's raining, you curse your ancestors. If you're rich, meaning you own 2 chickens and a hat, you might have a chamber pot, emphasis on might. And yet, for all its flaws, your home is a fortress. It keeps out the wolves, the wind, and most of the judgmental glances from Marjorie next door. It's yours, until the Lord says otherwise. Now let's talk fire. The hearth is life. Heat, cooking, light, it all happens here. You keep it going all day, night too. Sometimes you smother it with ash to save embers, waking up to nurse it back like a cranky child. Run out of firewood, time to burn dung cakes. Yes, dung, shaped, dried, and stacked like little brown promises of warmth. But be careful. One spark, and your thatch roof becomes a torch. Entire villages have gone up faster than you can say, bucket line. Fire was the medieval version of deleting your hard drive. Historians still argue whether peasants feared fire more than famine. One chronicler claimed more homes were lost to chimneyless hearths than to Viking raids. A slight exaggeration, but not by much. And you haven't even met your housemates. Fleas, lice, and bedbugs are permanent residents. You've named a few. You sleep on straw, and no matter how often you change it, the bugs always win. Some say spreading wild mint keeps them away. Others say prayers. You do both, and still itch like a cursed porcupine. There's no privacy. You eat while your spouse bathes. You sleep while your cousin sharpens a scythe beside you. And if someone dies in the night, which happens more often than you'd like, you make space, then move on. Fringe fact. In parts of Northern Europe, peasants once believed that hanging a hedgehog skin above the bed kept fleas away. You tried it. It didn't work. Now you just have a weird hedgehog skin over your bed, and even more fleas. You hear a commotion outside. A traveling peddler's in the village, hawking combs, pins, and some foreign thing called soap. You're skeptical. Soap is for people with fountains and free time. Still, you trade a few eggs for a sliver. That night, you use it. The kids cry. You feel suspiciously clean. Will it last? No. But for a moment, you smell like lavender and lies. Back inside, your spouse patches a tunic with thread, so thin, it's basically philosophy. You stir the evening stew and fish out a beetle. You name it Gregory and throw it into the fire. He dies a hero, dies a Gissi. The wind howls outside. The roof rustles. A mouse sings its song of the damned. You tuck yourself beneath the scratchy wool blanket and listen. This place, this heap of mud and miracle, shelters your stories, your aches, your little wins. It leaks, it stinks, it houses nightmares, but it's home. You wake to the unmistakable sound of dripping, slow, rhythmic, and coming from the roof. Great, it's raining again. You roll over and spot the growing puddle in the corner, right where your shoes were. Past tense. Were. Now they're 2 sad little boats. You mutter something halfway between a prayer and a threat, then drag yourself up and step carefully across the slick, cold floor. Outside, the sky is a solid grey sponge. Rain lashes the village in sideways sheets. The pigs are grumpy. The ducks smug. The fields already drowning. You sigh. Because this isn't just bad weather, it's disaster weather. Rain like this doesn't just mean wet socks and soggy firewood. It means flooded fields, rotting grain, and if it keeps going, famine. You know this rhythm. The spring started late, the summer barely warmed, and now autumn's pouring every lost storm into your lap. You squint across the commons and see John, the village elder, trying to dig a trench with a spoon. Bless him. The fields are the lifeblood of your life, but they're also a jealous, moody mess. You depend on rye, barley, peas, and oats, mostly. Wheat is too fancy. That's for the church, the Lord, and maybe the baker if he's feeling lucky. Your job is to coax what you can from the earth, knowing full well that a late frost, a nasty fungus, or too much rain can erase months of labor overnight. And here's the kicker, it's happening again. The last time the harvest failed, people ate bark. Not poetic metaphor bark, actual bark, stripped from trees, boiled until soft, and then choked down like a penance. And don't even get started on famine bread, a cheerful recipe involving straw, weeds, and sawdust, delicious and slightly toxic. You remember that year? People grew quiet. Children stopped playing. The blacksmith started sharpening tools no one asked for. And Marjorie, of course, claimed she could turn thistle into soup. She couldn't. It was more of a gas. Historians still argue whether medieval famines were mostly caused by weather, disease, or bad politics. The truth is likely all three. Climate shifts, poor planning, and grain hoarding from the top made hunger a recurring guest. And when famine hit, it didn't come alone. It brought malnutrition, which opened the door to disease. Your immune system doesn't stand a chance when you've been living on turnip broth and wishful thinking. Children die first, then the elderly, then the unlucky. The church tells you it's divine punishment. You try to believe it, but it's hard to trust a God who's allowed 4 straight weeks of rain to flatten your rye. Still, you trudge out with your hood up and your expectations down. The path to your strip of land is now a swamp. You slip twice. The second time, you just lie there for a moment and let the rain soak you. It's oddly peaceful. Then you hear the squelch of footsteps. It's the bailiff. Of course it is. He stands beneath an oilcloth, bone dry and grinning like a man who's never had to dig a ditch in his life. He informs you cheerfully that your grain tithes are still due next week. Yes, even if half your field has turned into a pond. No, he doesn't care. Yes, he'll be bringing a cart. No, you can't borrow it. You nod, because arguing gets you fined, and possibly flogged. You smile through your teeth and imagine the cartwheel getting stuck in the mud, just hypothetically. You check your grain sacks later. They're damp, which means they'll probably mold, which means you either eat them quickly or lose them entirely. You decide to bake them into dense loaves tonight, bread so thick it could stop a sword. You'll call it battle bread. Back at the hovel, your spouse has already lit the fire. The kids are poking a dead frog with a stick, which is less alarming than it sounds. You crush the grain into a coarse mush, add what's left of your salt, and form lumps that barely qualify as loaves. Into the ash they go. Meanwhile, outside, the village is falling into a slow, wet panic. Everyone knows what's coming. You can see it in the way people glance at their food stores, at their livestock, at each other. There's a tightness in the air, an unspoken whisper. How long do you think we can last? Some of the younger men talk about traveling to the next manor, maybe selling labor for food. But the roads are dangerous. Bandits, wolves, and worst of all, unfamiliar taxes. Others just wait, because waiting is what peasants do best. Waiting for the rain to stop, waiting for the Lord to change his mind, waiting for the sickness to pass. Fringe fact, in a few desperate years, records show people literally eating earth, specifically a chalky clay called geophagy. Supposedly filled the stomach, definitely ruined the intestines. By nightfall, the rain hasn't stopped. You gather around the hearth. The bread is done, kind of. You each gnaw a chunk like a beaver working through furniture. It's warm, and it stays down. That's enough. Outside, thunder rolls. The sky opens wider, and the roof drips in 3 new places. You lie back, water dripping just beyond your ear, and think, we'll get through this. We always do. Then you remember tomorrow is tithe day. You close your eyes and pray for a dry dawn. You wake to a knock, not a friendly one. 3 hard thumps at your door before the rooster crows. You know that rhythm. You don't even need to look. It's the Lord's steward, which is to say, your landlord, tax collector, food inspector, and all-around enthusiasm killer. You unlatch the door, and there he is, cloaked in wool, dry as a sermon, smelling faintly of wax and power. He doesn't greet you. He doesn't smile. He just says, "It's time." Time for what? Oh, nothing dramatic. Just to pay your annual feudal dues, hand over a portion of your harvest, and prove that you haven't illegally sold a pig, had a 3rd child without permission, or moved a fence by 2 inches. Normal Tuesday stuff. You throw on your second-best tunic, still damp, still covered in mystery stains, and follow him to the manor court. Your neighbours trail behind, all squinting into the early light, muttering about potatoes, which haven't been invented yet, and adjusting their attitudes. The manor itself sits atop the slight hill, the only stone structure in eyeshot. It isn't a castle, more like a large house with delusions of grandeur, but to you, it may as well be Versailles. It's dry, it's warm, and it's not yours. Inside, the Lord's bailiff stands ready with a wax tablet, a quill, and the most irritating smirk in the Tri-County area. You line up. Everyone does. This is the part where you explain, patiently, that your harvest failed because of rain, worms, and divine irony. The bailiff pretends to listen, then nods and takes your barley anyway. You don't protest. You just hand it over and feel your winter shrinking before your eyes. Historians still argue whether lords were truly oppressive or simply functioning within the expectations of their time. Some records show benevolent stewards who protected villages during plague or invasion. Others show fines for crimes like gathering fallen twigs without license. You draw your own conclusions. Your dues aren't just grain. They might include labor too, helping build roads, fix fences, or dig ditches for drainage. Especially ironic, given how wet everything already is. You work 2 days a week on the domain, the Lord's private land, without pay. Yes, without pay. And if you're sick, too bad. The ditch still needs digging. Today, you're lucky. No ditch, just a fine. Apparently your pig wandered into the Lord's barley field last week. Again. Sir Oinks-a-lot, bless him, is a repeat offender. You pay a few coins and a hen, hoping that'll satisfy them. The hen looks at you like you've betrayed her. You have. As the court continues, you see some justice, of a sort. Tom the shepherd is fined for letting his dog chase a goose. Agnes is accused of selling watered-down ale. Again. And young Will is caught sneaking extra grain into his boots. No one's surprised. He's fined and given a stern talking to, which he probably tunes out. He always does. Then comes the sermon. The priest, wheeled in like a moral punctuation mark, reminds everyone that obedience is next to godliness. He quotes scripture. You pretend to listen. Your stomach grumbles. The bread you packed is soggy. Eventually, you're dismissed. You trudge back downhill, lighter in grain, heavier in resentment. Your spouse meets you at the door with a look that says, "How bad?" You shrug and hand over a feather. It was the hen's. Still, the day isn't over. You've got to pay your tithe to the church too. Yep. More giving. The tithe is supposed to be 1/10 of everything you grow or raise. Some priests are lenient. Yours is not. He's got a nose for overripe apples and secret chickens. You once saw him sniff a sack and declare it underfilled by God's measure. You argued. He fined you. You pay in barley this time, because barley doesn't cluck when you hand it over. That afternoon, you return to your field. The rain has softened, but the ground is still a soup. You check your thatch. One corner collapsed. You patch it with straw and desperation. Then, a flash of brightness. No, not divine intervention, just the sun breaking through, briefly, casting gold across the damp earth. You squint up. Maybe it'll dry things. Maybe the grain still growing won't rot. Fringe fact. Some peasants believed that rain during a full moon was a sign of plague to come. You check the sky nervously. It's not a full moon. Yet. You work until sundown, bent, soaked, and mostly silent. Your mind drifts to stories, the ones passed down by candlelight, of times when the serfs rose up, stormed the manor, and demanded freedom. You always listen, always imagine what it'd feel like to say no to a steward. But then you remember what happened next in those stories. Spoiler, it doesn't end well. Night creeps in. The fire's already lit when you return. Dinner is watery leeks and a bit of dried sausage you'd hidden in a boot last winter. It's tough, possibly haunted, but you eat it anyway. You sit by the fire, staring into the orange glow, your mind spinning through numbers. How much you lost, how little remains, and how long it might be until the next Jews arrive. Your child asks if you're rich because you own shoes. You laugh. Then you pause. You say, "Yes, tonight I am." And for just a moment, you believe it. You wake up, and it's fish again. A dull grey hunk of dried cod stares up at you from the table, like it also didn't ask to be here. It smells like salt, sorrow, and the inside of your uncle's boot. You sigh and pick it up, already resigned. It's Lent. Again. Technically, there are multiple fasting periods throughout the year. Lent just happens to be the longest and loudest. 40 days of no meat, no dairy, no eggs, and absolutely no fun. The church says it's for spiritual cleansing. You suspect it's also a clever way to make peasants miserable and obedient at the same time. But it doesn't stop there. Depending on the calendar, you might have to fast during Advent, Ember Days, Rogation Days, and every Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday that some bishop centuries ago decided was holy. In total, you're looking at more than 140 fast days per year. That's almost half the calendar. Your stomach is writing a letter of protest, but you can't read, so it goes unanswered. This morning's breakfast is dried fish and barley bread. You dip it in weak ale to soften the texture and your expectations. It doesn't help. Somewhere in the corner, your youngest mutters that even the pig looks disappointed. Sir Oinks-a-Lot snorts in agreement. Still, you eat. Historians still argue whether fasting was truly observed by all classes, or if it mostly fell on the poor. Nobles had access to almond milk, preserved fruits, and fine fish sauces to ease the burden. You, on the other hand, have a wooden spoon and optimism. Some days, you get lucky. A neighbor brings over a few onions. Another shares some smoked eel. You try not to ask where he got it, because legally fished isn't really a thing when you're hungry. Church doctrine says fasting brings you closer to God. You're not so sure. It mostly just brings you closer to malnutrition. And then there's the sermons. Your priest, Father Dunstan, is a man of great faith, limited patience, and a beard that looks like it's housing something. He stands in the pulpit each Sunday and reminds everyone that indulgence is sin, laughter is suspect, and a little suffering never killed anyone. You resist the urge to raise your hand and say, "Actually, Father?" Still, the rituals continue. You attend Mass, you chant, you kneel on cold stone until your knees forget what circulation feels like, and you pretend not to notice that the priest's wine looks a lot more cheerful than your fish water. By midday, you're in the field again. Hunger makes you clumsy. You trip twice, drop your rake, curse under your breath and immediately apologize to Saint Isidore, the patron of farmers. You hope he understands. He probably does. Lunch is more of the same. Flatbread, pickled beets, and a chunk of something you think was cheese. It could also be soap. The debate continues. You chew slowly, watching clouds roll in. Rain again. Because of course. Now, about holy days. On paper, they're days of rest. In practice, they're days where you do different labor, Church cleaning, procession walking, candle making, sometimes singing if your voice is passable and your face doesn't scare the priest. Today is St. Cuthbert's feast, which means you're expected to wear clean clothes, good luck, light extra candles if you can afford wax, and avoid arguing, nearly impossible. You participate, mostly out of habit. The villagers gather. The bell rings. People shuffle in, soaked and shivering. The priest drones on about temptation and humility. A child sneezes violently in the front row. No one moves. We've all made peace with shared germs by now. Then come the penitents, a few villagers crawling down the aisle on hands and knees to atone for something. Could be gossip, could be stealing, could just be the vague weight of existing while hungry. Fringe fact. In some regions, public penance involved wearing a sack of flour around your neck labeled with your sin. One unlucky soul once wore lusty thoughts while feeding chickens. You try not to look. The feast afterward is modest. A communal pot of pottage. Someone brings apples. Someone else sneaks in a pigeon and swears it was a very large fish. Everyone looks the other way. You eat. You laugh a little. And for a moment, the rules soften. But fasting isn't just about food. It's about control. About reminding you, daily, that you are small, dependent, and under watch. By the church. By the Lord. By the stars, if you believe Marjorie's cousin, who swears the moon once scolded her in a dream. Even at home, you can't escape the rhythm. Your spouse is soaking lentils. The kids are playing Catch the Beetle. You're mending a sandal with twine and prayer. The pig is sulking. It's a Tuesday. You sit at the hearth, staring into the flames. The smell of fish lingers in your clothes, your hands, your soul. You wonder how long until the next feast day where meat is allowed. Then you remember it's 3 weeks away. You lie down hungry and whisper a joke to the dark. What did the herring say to the monk? Silence. Stop dragging me into this. The pig grunts. You'll take it as a laugh. You wake up to silence, not the peaceful kind, the unnatural kind. No chickens clucking, no pigs snorting, no neighbor shouting about stolen firewood, just the low whine of wind through empty alleys and the strange stillness that settles before something terrible arrives. Your body knows it before your mind does. You step outside and the world feels wrong. Damp, yes, but too quiet. The dogs aren't barking. The village children are nowhere to be seen. Even the crows, those nosy black gossips, have vanished from their usual perch. You glance down the lane and spot 3 figures in black. Not priests, not bailiffs, plague watchers. They stand with covered faces and long sticks, poking at something slumped by the well. A shape, a person. You squint. It's old Will, the cobbler, or was. He's not moving. And his skin looks wrong, greyish, blotched. You freeze. Your stomach turns. You know what this is. The plague has come. Historians still argue whether it arrived through rats on merchant ships, or travellers from the continent, or a particularly cursed loaf of rye. All you know is that once it arrives, it doesn't leave politely. The Black Death has no manners. You retreat inside and shut the door. It doesn't help. You hear a wail from 3 houses down, someone crying, someone screaming. The sound cuts off too suddenly. You boil water. You don't know why. It feels like the right thing to do. Everyone says burn things, boil things, keep clean. You wish you'd started earlier. By noon, rumours run faster than horses. Half the next village is gone. Father Dunstan locked the church doors and won't come out. Marjorie's cousin has black spots on her arms. Don't touch cats, or touch more cats. Depends who you ask. People try everything. Garlic necklaces, prayers shouted into the wind, burning bundles of herbs in doorways. One man rubs a dead toad on his chest and swears it will draw out the poison. He looks worse the next day. Some start flagellating, whipping themselves through the streets, convinced that suffering will cleanse the sin that brought this plague. You watch them march through the village square, chanting, bleeding, their eyes wide with ecstasy or terror. It's hard to tell the difference. You stay back, far back. Your family huddles in the corner. You press damp cloths to the children's faces, though you're not sure what good it'll do. Your spouse murmurs a prayer to Saint Sebastian. He's supposed to protect against plague. You whisper his name too, just in case. Night falls fast. You barely eat. Just a few sips of barley soup and a heel of bread. No one's hungry. Or rather, everyone's too scared to admit they're hungry. You sit by the fire, staring into it like it might blink first. A knock. You jump. It's your neighbor, Joan. Her face is pale. She says her daughter is sick. Fever. Spots. She's asking if you've seen the priest. You shake your head. No one's seen Father Dunstan since morning. Some say he's already fled. Others say he's locked himself in with wine and regret. Joan nods. She doesn't ask for help. She knows. She walks away slowly. You don't sleep. Instead, you count breaths. You listen for coughs. You imagine every itch is the start of something fatal. And in the dark, you remember the last big sickness 10 years ago. Not as bad, but bad enough. You remember the faces, the ones who didn't wake up, the mass graves, the silence that came after. This feels worse. By morning, there are 5 more dead. One of them was the miller. His wife is wandering the road in her nightgown, humming to herself and calling for her baby, who isn't there. You stay indoors. You hammer shut the windows. You place herbs under the door. You draw a cross above it with chalk. You whisper the psalms you barely remember. Anything. The days blur. People stop burying the dead. There are too many. Instead, carts roll down the road, bodies piled like kindling, eyes open, mouths still forming last words. The bailiff stops coming. The steward is gone. Even the reeve disappears. Rumor has it he dressed as a monk and fled east. Only the desperate remain. Fringe fact. Some believe the plague was spread by bad air, called miasma. So they walked around with beaked masks, stuffed with herbs and vinegar-soaked cloth. The smell was supposed to block the sickness. You try making one. You look ridiculous, but you keep it on. After 2 weeks, your village is a ghost. You peek outside and count less than 30 people where there used to be 100. Fields are overgrown. Chickens roam freely. Sir Oinks-a-Lot stands in the middle of the square like he's king now. You chuckle, weakly. Your family is still breathing. Somehow. You don't know how long it'll last, but each day feels like a small, defiant miracle. And then, one morning, just as suddenly as it came, it starts to fade. No new coughs, no new wails. The carts stop rolling. A cautious silence returns, not the ominous kind, a quieter kind, like the earth finally exhaled. You don't cheer. No one does. You just sit by the fire and hold your child's hand. Warm. Still warm. You survived. For now. You wake to a smell so vile it pulls you upright before your eyes even open. It's thick. Wet. Sweet in the worst way. Like rotting meat mixed with smoke and despair. You gag. Then realize, it's you. You sniff your tunic. A mistake. You strip it off and toss it near the fire, where it hisses like it's offended to be awake too. That smell, well, it's part sweat, part mildew, and possibly part corpse adjacent. You haven't changed clothes in 4 days. A week? Time melted during the plague. Now you measure life in coughs and whimpers. Your hovel smells like everyone who's ever lived in it, and maybe a few who died in it. There's no shame in it. Everyone reeks. Bathing, once a semi-regular chore, has become something you whisper about like it's witchcraft. The river's cold, risky, and haunted by memories of floating bodies. The public bathhouse shut down weeks ago. The idea of communal steam now feels more like a curse than a comfort. So, you embrace the medieval hygiene strategy. Cover the stink with stronger stink. You rub crushed mint leaves on your neck. Toss dried lavender into the hearth. Your spouse shoves sage in your hood like a blessing/insult. You chew fennel seeds, not for flavor, but to ward off plague breath, or at least not offend the chicken you're talking to. Historians still argue whether medieval people were truly filthy by nature, or simply working with bad options. Sure, nobles had perfumed gloves and rosewater rinses, but most peasants did what they could with cold streams, hard soap, and peer pressure. You know one thing for sure. Clean is relative. Right now, less offensive than your neighbor counts as a win. You step outside and the air hits you like a cold slap. The wind carries a mixture of wet leaves, ash, and decay. The village still stinks. It always stinks. But the plague's recent exodus added a few new layers. Someone's burning something in the next yard. Maybe laundry. Maybe bodies. You don't ask. You pass the well and catch a glimpse of your reflection. Yikes. Your hair looks like it's been through a storm, and possibly started one. Your beard, once scruffy charming, has gone feral. There's dirt behind your ears that might now qualify as a second skin. You splash water on your face. It's so cold it makes you yelp. A toad nearby croaks in sympathy, or mockery. Hard to tell with toads. Inside, your family is pretending not to notice the smell. Your spouse fans the air with a cooking pot lid. The kids have taken to sniffing herbs like it's a game. You pretend to be amused. It's laundry day, which means boiling water, scrubbing tunics on a flat rock, and praying the lice don't crawl back faster than you can rinse. You heat water over the fire. A long, grumpy process. The pot is too small. The smoke gets in your eyes. And the smell, oh, the smell that rises when the clothes hit the water, is enough to drive out ghosts. You gag. You stir. You add soap, which is just lye, fat, and something vaguely herbal. It barely helps. You scrub like your soul depends on it. A neighbor walks by and shouts, "Baptizing your tunic, are you?" You shout back, "Trying to cast out demons." You both laugh, weakly. Later, you hang the garments on a line strung between two posts. The breeze carries off a sock. You let it go. That sock saw things. It deserves freedom. Now, let's talk about toilets, or the lack thereof. Your privy is a wooden shack over a pit, maybe 15 steps from the house. In theory, it works. In practice, it floods when it rains, stinks even when it doesn't, and serves as a clubhouse for rats the size of small cats. Fringe fact: in parts of Europe, some people believed night air from privies could make you sick, so they'd hold it in till morning or wear masks just to relieve themselves. You tried it once. The mask didn't help. The smell went through it. You cried a little. Sometimes you use a chamber pot, especially in winter. It's convenient until someone kicks it over in the dark. You've done it. Everyone has. No one talks about it. The garbage. That goes out the door, into the alley, down the hill, into the creek, along with everyone else's garbage. It forms a magical stream of decay that somehow supports ducks, pigs, and one mysterious child who swims in it anyway. Still, you manage. Somehow. By midday, the sun peeks out. Your freshly washed tunic flaps in the wind. You put it on. It's still damp, but it doesn't smell like doom anymore. You feel almost human. You chop wood for the fire. The axe slips. You curse. The axe bounces. You curse louder. A neighbor says, "Language!" and you apologize to the air, just in case St. Anthony's listening. You light some rosemary in the hearth. It smells sharp and herbal. You close your eyes and imagine you're in a Roman bath, lounging with scented oils and fig wine. Then a chicken bites your toe. Fantasy over. Evening brings some peace. The fire burns clean. The children stop scratching. The house smells of herbs and cooked barley. Your spouse sings softly. Something about rivers and saints. You don't know the words, but the tune feels familiar. You sit by the fire, wrapped in a clean tunic, smelling faintly of ash and mint. You survived the plague. You fought the stink. You earned this moment. And somewhere in the thatch, a flea jumps. Because of course it does. You wake with a sore throat and a nose like a leaky wineskin. You don't panic. Yet. It could just be the smoke. Or the dust. Or the damp. Or, the dozen people breathing in your face all night. But it's probably not the plague. Probably. Still, you're sniffling, sweating, and everything aches. That last one might just be age. Or the fact that you slept curled around a jug of millet like it was a stuffed animal. Either way, you're sick. Time to consult the finest minds medicine has to offer, which unfortunately all died in the last plague wave or moved 3 villages away. So you're stuck with medieval healthcare. Let's begin. First, your spouse insists on the basics. Drink warm broth, rest, and wrap yourself in every scrap of wool you own. Simple, sensible, surprisingly effective. But then comes the real treatment. You're dragged outside and assessed by old Nan, the village healer. She pokes you in the stomach, sniffs your breath, mutters something about spleen winds, and declares, "Too much yellow bile. We must balance the humours." You nod. You don't understand, but no one wants their bile unbalanced. Humorism, the dominant theory of the time, says your body is made of 4 fluids: blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm. Get too much of one. Boom. Illness. Too little. Same problem. It's like a recipe where no one knows what the dish is supposed to taste like. So you're bundled up and prepared for the first remedy. Bleeding. Yes, bleeding. Nan brings out her trusty knife, a dull, slightly rusted thing that's seen more elbows than logic, and slices a tiny vein in your forearm. A few drops of blood hit the bowl. She nods with satisfaction. You're not sure what's worse, the dizziness or the knowledge that this is supposed to help. Historians still argue whether bloodletting was as common as texts claim, or if it was mostly reserved for dramatic flair and high fevers. Either way, it's not fun, and it stains your only clean tunic. After the bleeding, she applies a poultice, a hot mess of herbs, breadcrumbs, and chicken grease slapped onto your chest like a culinary insult. It smells like soup. You try not to lick it. You're also given a tincture, crushed garlic, vinegar, and something that may or may not be crushed beetle. It burns going down. You cry. Nan calls you delicate. To balance your phlegm, she suggests stewing leeks in goat milk and inhaling the steam. You try, you cough. The goat walks past the window and looks vaguely offended. Still, there's a strange comfort to it all. You're being cared for. Even if the science is questionable and the hygiene non-existent, someone is tending you with earnest, calloused hands. It matters. But medicine isn't just poultices and prayers. It's also superstition. Your neighbor leaves a toad tied to a string on your doorknob to absorb the illness. Another pins a small cloth pouch to your belt filled with dried sage, a finger bone from a chicken, and a scrap of blue thread. You wear it. What else can you do? Someone suggests placing a live eel on your stomach. You draw the line there. Fringe fact? In some parts of Europe, a common fever remedy was to bake a dead mole into a pie, bury it under your doorstep, and never speak of it again. You're open-minded, but not that open-minded. At night, your fever spikes. You dream of floating, of singing pigs, of Saint Sebastian winking at you from a tree. You wake up drenched, muttering and clutching a turnip like it's your child. Your spouse pats your head. "Better out than in," they say. You vomit. Again. The next morning, Nan returns. She declares the illness shifting, which apparently is a good thing. She recommends something bitter to chase away the demons. You suggest church wine. She doesn't laugh. Instead, you chew bark, real bark, from a willow tree. It's bitter, gritty, and leaves you with splinters between your teeth. But hours later, your fever dips. Maybe it worked. Maybe the toad did. You'll never know. Your appetite returns slowly. You start with broth, then a bit of bread, then cheese so sharp it could cut glass. You smile for the first time in days. The children cheer. The pig snorts. Healing, in the Middle Ages, is never certain, but it's always a group effort. People check in. They bring bits of food, scraps of cloth, even a clean comb. They don't have much, but what they have, they share. And somewhere between the fever and the garlic poultices, you feel alive again. By the fourth day, you're up. Wobbly, weak, and still trailing the scent of boiled herbs, but vertical. You thank Nan. She nods and mumbles something about needing more toads. You light a candle for Saint Roche, patron of plague victims. You say a little prayer. Not because you believe it cured you, but because surviving anything here feels like a miracle. You take a slow walk around the village. Birdsong, smoke curling from chimneys, the distant clang of someone ruining laundry. Life, in its quiet, messy rhythm, has returned. You survived. And if you ever get sick again, well, at least you still have the toad pouch. You wake to singing, not the pretty kind. This is the off-key, half-screamed chanting of strangers. Strangers in cloaks, with sticks, beating themselves, bleeding. The flagellants are here. You peek out through a gap in your shutter, and sure enough, there they are, marching through your village square like a grim parade of pain and repentance. Barefoot, red-faced, and chanting in Latin no one quite understands. Thwack, thwack. The sound of leather on skin echoes between the huts. You rub your eyes. It's too early for this. The villagers gather, quiet, wary. Some cross themselves. Some look away. A few kids giggle before being shushed. You stand back, watching. The flagellants travel in groups of 20 to 40, wandering from town to town with the kind of confidence that only comes from extreme conviction or absolute madness. They believe the plague is punishment, that only through self-punishment can the world be cleansed. So they walk, chant, whip themselves, and preach repentance. They sleep in barns, eat whatever they're given, and never bathe. Because, of course, suffering is the point. One of them, tall, sunburnt, and bleeding from the back, starts shouting a sermon. He says the end is near, that you must confess, that the church has failed, that God is watching and he is furious. You shift uncomfortably. It's hard not to feel judged by a man who's been smacking himself since sunrise. Historians still argue whether the flagellant movements were grassroots acts of piety or early forms of rebellion against church authority. Some see them as desperate spiritual protests. Others see unhinged mob behavior. You mostly see bruises and poor life choices. After the sermon, the group sets up camp near the well. They accept bread, cheese, and odd stares. You send over a crust of rye and a jar of pickled onions, part generosity, part bribe to keep them from sleeping near your pigsty. But they're not the only wanderers these days. The plague, famine, and general hopelessness have driven people to pilgrimage, long journeys to holy sites in hopes of healing, blessing, or just change. Some go to Canterbury, others to Walsingham, and a few to somewhere called that hill where the Virgin sneezed once. Probably a legend, possibly not. You see them pass every few days, thin, sunburned, blistered travellers with walking staffs and wide eyes. Some wear symbols, scallop shells, iron crosses, or little bells that jingle as they shuffle past. They speak of visions, relics, and miracles. One man swears he saw St. Thomas Becket wink at him through a stained glass window. You just nod politely. Pilgrims are harmless mostly. Quacks? Less so. Quack doctors appear during every crisis, like mushrooms after rain. They sell potions made of vinegar, sage, and things better left unidentified. One offers you a plague cure that smells like boiled horse and sadness. You pass. Another tries to trade blessed leeches in a tiny box. You ask if the leeches are house-trained. He doesn't laugh. Still, some folk believe them. Hope is hard to find, and when it comes bottled in clay jars, people reach for it. You don't. Not yet. Instead, you return to your work. Today, that means collecting herbs. You and your spouse trek to the edge of the woods, following the old woman's directions. Left at the crooked oak, right past the angry goose. Sure enough, there's the goose, and it is angry. You gather yarrow, fennel, and wormwood, used for fevers, wounds, and stomach rot. Whether they work or just smell nice, no one really knows. But having them makes you feel prepared. You spot an odd patch of mushrooms growing in a ring. Your spouse grabs your sleeve before you step inside. "Fairy circle," they whisper. You back away, quickly. Fringe fact? Some believed fairy rings were portals to other realms, or traps that steal your soul if you dance inside them. You don't plan to find out. You've got enough problems in this realm. Back in the village, a new peddler arrives. He's loud, flashy, smiling too much for someone with that many missing teeth. He's selling relics, a splinter from the true cross, a vial of Mary's tears, and a feather from the angel Gabriel. You raise an eyebrow. He winks. Still, people crowd around. Someone buys a bone that belonged to St. Leonard's goat. You sigh. Later, you sit by the fire, watching the flagellants prepare to leave. They light torches, bandage their wounds, and chant once more. One stops at your door, offers you a blessing. You accept, more out of politeness than belief. He presses a hand to your forehead and whispers something. You feel a moment of warmth. Then he's gone. The night settles. The travelers move on. The quacks pack up. The pilgrims limp toward the next miracle. The flagellants disappear into the mist, singing as they go. And you? You tuck your herbs by the hearth, say a short prayer to Saint Radegund. She's supposed to help with illness and headaches, and lie down. Maybe tomorrow will be quiet. You hope? You wake up and decide you need new clothes. Not because fashion matters. This is the 14th century and you've been wearing the same tunic since St. Swithin's day. But because yours is currently more whole than fabric, and the stitching gave up during your last sneezing fit. Also, you smell like garlic, old goat, and regret. You dig through the family chest, which is less of a wardrobe and more of a wooden box filled with dreams. Inside, a moth-eaten hood, a pair of socks that once belonged to your grandfather, and a tunic that might be purple if you squint through fog and imagination. You pull it on. It fits, badly, but it's clean, mostly. And today, that's a luxury. Because today, you're going to the market. But not just to shop. You've decided to upgrade your plague protection outfit. After all, everyone's doing it. And while you can't afford a beak mask or a blessed chainmail apron, you can at least show up in style. Now, let's talk plague fashion. In the cities, the plague doctor look is unmistakable. Long waxed coat, gloves, wide-brimmed hat, and the infamous beaked mask, stuffed with herbs, spices, and sometimes onions. The idea? The mask filters out the bad air, miasma, thought to carry disease. It's terrifying. And weirdly, stylish. You saw one once, just after the last outbreak. He walked into town like a bird from someone's nightmare, moving slowly through the streets, holding a stick to prod people or lift bed sheets. Children ran. Adults bowed. The pigs stared. Even Sir Oinksalot kept his distance. You want something similar, but budget-friendly. At the market, you wander past stalls selling fabrics, boots, herbs, and things that definitely aren't legal. A merchant with 2 teeth and 0 shame offers you a long brown cloak and a hat that smells like fermented apple. You take both. You also pick up a garlic necklace, rumored to keep away spirits, rats, and unwanted suitors. You string it on with pride. Then you spot something truly magical, a toad pouch embroidered with tiny stars. It keeps the plague away, the seller promises. How? You ask. It just does. Good enough. You hand over a bundle of onions and half a loaf of rye. The pouch is yours. Historians still argue whether these plague charms actually gave people psychological comfort or just made them easier to identify in a crowd of sneezing doom. Either way, you're committed to the look. You return home, a vision of mismatched fabric, garlic, and frog-related confidence. Your spouse takes one look and blinks. Feeling stylish, you pose. Protected, they hand you a comb. You've got straw in your beard. You spend the afternoon improving the outfit. You stuff lavender into the pockets. You sew a little felt eye onto the hat. You practice your serious healer face in the water basin's reflection. It needs work. Then your neighbor Joan shows up, coughing. You freeze. She sees your outfit and stops mid-hack. Are you a doctor now? You hesitate. I'm plague aware. She nods like that makes perfect sense. Can you check on my brother? He says his toes are turning green. You mutter something about needing more toads and back away slowly. Evening comes. You sit by the fire, cloak draped dramatically, toad pouch hanging from your belt, garlic swinging like a tiny weapon of hope. You feel invincible and slightly nauseous. Your spouse roasts parsnips over the flame. The children pretend your mask is a dragon face. The pig refuses to sit near you. Fringe fact. In some villages, people tied frogs, snakes, or even live pigeons to infected areas of the body, believing they would draw out the illness. You tried the frog once. It looked offended. You apologized. That night, you dream of walking through the city, cloak billowing, villagers cheering, the plague shrinking away from your garlic-scented aura. You save the baker's daughter. The bishop hugs you. Even the fleas flee. Then you wake up, sweaty and tangled in your new cloak, which caught fire slightly during the night. You slap it out and sigh. So much for heroic dreams. Still, your outfit remains. A symbol of resilience, foolishness, and the human need to do something. Even if it's just wearing a sack of herbs and pretending you're safer than you are. You put it back on. Because tomorrow, you've promised to check on Joan's brother. Green toes and all. You wake up to a strange noise. It's not the pig, not the wind. It's your own stomach, growling like a caged beast. You're hungry, not the didn't eat enough bread kind of hungry, but the hollow, aching kind. The kind where you think about food all the time. The kind where your dreams smell like roasted duck and you wake up chewing on your sleeve. The harvest has failed. Again. It started with too much rain. Then came the mold. The rats. The blackened wheat heads that flaked into ash when touched. The barley didn't sprout. The oats drowned. Even the turnips, usually dependable little warriors, turned bitter and cracked in the earth. There's nothing left to gather. You open the food chest, empty. You tilt the grain jar. A few sad kernels tumble out like dying applause. Your spouse gives you a look, the kind that says, it's time. Time for famine mode. First, you forage. You head into the woods with a basket and cautious optimism. You know the spots, places where wild garlic grows, where nettles might still be soft enough to boil, where mushrooms sprout in damp corners. You gather handfuls of leaves, berries, and roots you think are edible. Think. You hold up one particular root and squint. It might be parsnip. It might be deadly nightshade. You ask your spouse. They shrug. You eat it anyway. You'll know by morning. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants had extensive plant knowledge, or just a dangerously high tolerance for guesswork. You're leaning toward guesswork. You return with your bounty, tiny, bitter, suspicious. You boil it into a stew so thin it could pass as broth in better years. Everyone eats in silence. Even the children don't complain. That's how you know it's bad. Still, you ration. You cut meals in half. Then in half again. You water down the ale. You stretch every crust. You chew slowly, savoring each grain like it's a feast. And when that's not enough, you get creative. There's something called bark bread. You've heard of it. You peel bark from young trees, dry it, grind it into a fine powder, and mix it with what little flour you have. The result is dense, chewy, and tastes exactly like what it is. Desperation. Your neighbor swears it keeps her full for hours. She also hasn't blinked in 3 days. Side effects, probably. You also try acorns, soaked and boiled to remove the bitterness. You feed some to the pig. He snorts, unimpressed. You eat them anyway. Then come the rumors. In the next village over, someone was caught boiling leather, actual shoe leather. They say if you scrape off the dirt and cook it long enough, it becomes edible. That's a strong word, but you consider it. Fringe fact. In several documented famines, people actually did eat leather belts, candle wax, even dried manure cakes. You don't judge. You just eye your own shoes and wonder how long you'd have to boil them. The worst part isn't the hunger. It's the waiting. Waiting for a messenger from the manor with grain relief. Waiting for the miller to say he found an old sack. Waiting for the snow that will lock you in for months. Waiting for something, anything, to break the cycle. You attend church more often now, not for peace, but for answers. Father Dunstan speaks of Job, of suffering, of tests. You think about testing his door at night and seeing if he's hiding salted meat. You don't, of course, but you think about it. By the second week, your youngest begins chewing on cloth. You stop them, gently. Then you look at the cloth and wonder how bad it would taste. You share stories at night. Not happy ones, food stories. That time your aunt made roast goose. That feast after harvest where you ate so much cheese you got dizzy. The time you caught a rabbit with your bare hands. Everyone laughs. Then goes quiet. You wake up dizzy now. Stand too fast and the world sways like a drunk on a boat. Your fingers are cold. Your ribs poke out. But you keep moving. You gather thistles. You boil weeds. You dry nettles. You chew bark. You keep going. Because that's what peasants do. And then, one day, it happens. You find a sack in the barn rafters. Forgotten, dusty, tied with old twine. You open it with trembling hands. Beans, small, wrinkled, perfect. You shout. Your spouse runs in. The kids cheer. Even Sir Oinksalot squeals with something like joy. You boil them slowly, reverently. The smell fills the hut like a miracle. You add herbs, just a pinch. Salt, if you have any. It doesn't matter. It smells like hope. You eat together, smiling, eyes shining. It's not much, but it's enough. You wake to the sound of a rooster crowing right next to your head. You open one eye and see feathers. A lot of them. He's perched on your pillow like he pays rent. You swat him off, but he just hops to the floor and struts out like he owns the place. You sigh and roll over, right into your spouse's elbow, which reminds you, you're married. And not just married, but married young. You were 14, maybe 15. The dates are fuzzy. No one had a cake or a printed invitation, just a priest, a handful of witnesses, and a generous helping of nervous sweating. Your spouse was older, a few years maybe. They wore a tunic that had seen better centuries and smelled like barley. You didn't mind. At the time, they had 3 teeth and 1 decent laugh. That was considered a win. You didn't choose them exactly. No one chooses freely. Marriages in your village are practical arrangements, about land, labor, and survival. Love is optional. In-laws are inevitable. And you don't get to find yourself first. You find someone who can pull a plow and maybe sow, and boom, you're wed. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants valued romantic love at all, or if they viewed marriage solely as an economic bond. Some letters show tenderness, others read like livestock contracts. Yours? Somewhere in between. You remember the awkward first night, the itchy blanket, the silence, the mutual agreement to fall asleep fully clothed. Passion came later, eventually, maybe. Your spouse grunts awake and starts snoring again. You poke them gently. They snore louder. You poke harder. Go check the chickens, you mutter. They grumble and roll out of bed. Love, right? Your children stir. One of them is yours, possibly both. You've never been great with numbers. They sleep curled up like cats in the corner, sharing a straw mattress and an unhealthy fascination with insects. Raising children in the village isn't easy. There's no school, no books, just chores, church, and the occasional wild goat chase. You teach them what you know: how to dig, how to knead dough, how to avoid stepping in anything squishy. Your oldest is nearly of marrying age. You cringe at the thought. But that's how it goes. If they're lucky, they'll get someone with strong arms and mild halitosis. You'll help negotiate. Probably offer a goat or a sack of grain, depending on the year and how desperate their future in-laws are. Your own courtship was brief. You exchanged glances at the village well. Then your parents exchanged chickens. Next thing you knew, you were standing in a chapel decorated with dried onions and Sister Agnes muttering something about fertility while shaking a sprig of rosemary over your head. Your wedding feast was modest. Flatbread, pottage, one stolen apple. But there was laughter, a song, and one man who drank too much ale and fell into the duck pond. Fringe fact: in some villages, the entire community would accompany newlyweds to their hut after the ceremony, loudly, to make sure they consummated properly. You thank every saint you know that your village is not that enthusiastic. You spend the day weaving baskets with your spouse. It's not romantic, but it's companionable. You argue over the right way to bind the reeds. They say clockwise. You say it doesn't matter if the basket holds onions and not philosophy. They win. You let them. That's marriage. You also talk about the harvest, the neighbors, the strange rash on Marjorie's chin. And then the future. Maybe we'll have more land next year, they say. Maybe we'll have shoes that match, you say. Maybe Sir Oinksalot will finally listen when I tell him to stay out of the bed. You both laugh. He won't. He never does. The day slips by. The sun softens. Your spouse braids your hair while you peel turnips. You hum a tune you half remember from your childhood. They hum along, off-key. It's terrible and sweet. That night, as you lay side by side on your lumpy straw mattress, you reach for their hand. It's rough, calloused, warm. You whisper, "Remember our first night?" They groan. "When I sneezed and knocked over the candle?" "Romantic." They chuckle. "I thought you were going to run." "I thought about it." Silence. "Why didn't you?" they ask. You think for a moment. "Because you gave me the bigger slice of bread." They smile in the dark. Sometimes that's all it takes. You wake up in the dark, not because the sun isn't up, but because someone's elbow is jammed into your eye socket. You grunt and shift, trying not to jostle too much. You're wedged between your youngest child and your cousin's widow, who moved in after her roof caved and her goat ran off with a traveling tinker. It's another crowded night in a one-room house, which is to say, a normal night. You sit up slowly, rubbing your face. There's straw in your hair, someone's sock in your lap, and a warm, damp something curled behind your knee. You hope it's the cat. You stretch, yawn, and immediately bang your head on the sloped ceiling beam. You swear under your breath and immediately apologize to St. Joseph for waking him up with your profanity. This is what privacy looks like in your world. None. Zero. Not a whisper of it. You share your entire living space, sleeping, eating, arguing, and very occasionally bathing, all within the same 12-foot radius. At night, it's a tangle of limbs, snores, and farts. At dawn, it's a symphony of groans, sneezes, and someone inevitably stepping in the chamber pot. Fringe fact: in especially crowded homes, medieval peasants sometimes slept sitting up in corners or propped against walls to save space, and because lying flat was believed by some to invite death. You tried it once. You just got a backache and a grumpy spouse. You shuffle over to the hearth. The coals are still warm. You blow on them, feed in a few twigs, and coax the fire back to life with the same tone you use on the pig. Firm, but gentle. You're up before the others, so you take a moment to enjoy the rare silence. No arguing, no one asking for food, no goat chewing your tunic. But soon, the house groans awake. Your spouse mumbles about aching joints. Your children start fighting over a blanket that's not even warm. Your cousin's widow begins her usual morning ritual of listing things you're doing wrong. Today, it's how you chop onions. You haven't even touched an onion yet. You eat a quick breakfast of barley mash, served with a side of judgment. Then you head outside to start the day. The village is stirring. Smoke curls from thatched roofs. Chickens are making unreasonable demands. A toddler runs by screaming, followed closely by a very determined duck. And over it all, the morning church bell tolls. Because it's Sunday. You put on your cleanest tunic, which is a low bar, and gather your household. You file into the chapel with the rest of the village, sitting shoulder to shoulder on wooden benches that creak in protest. Mass is long. The priest is longer. Father Dunstan drones on about sin, virtue, and why staring too long at your neighbour's wife might doom you to hell. You doze off briefly during the part about lepers and wake up just in time for the smoke blessing. Everyone files out of church squinting, coughing, and vaguely more virtuous. Afterward, the gossiping begins. You gather near the well, pretending to be interested in Marjorie's miracle onion that supposedly cured her cousin's cough. Really, you're just trying to get news. Did the baker's wife finally run off with the peddler? Is the reeve still limping from that goose attack? Has anyone seen the miller's son since the maypole dance? You have. He's in the woods with the blacksmith's daughter, frequently. You listen, you nod, you offer just enough commentary to stay included, but not enough to become the next target. Because in a village this small, suspicion spreads faster than fire. You remember the time someone blamed your household for a missing loaf of bread. It turned out to be the bailiff's dog. But the stink of accusation lingered like bad cheese. You still haven't forgiven the dog. Privacy isn't just physical. There's no such thing as a private life in a medieval village. Everyone knows who argues with their spouse, who sings in the fields, who talks to their sheep too much, looking at you, John, and who hasn't washed their tunic since Michaelmas, which, by the way, was 4 months ago. You return home after church and spend the afternoon weaving, patching, and chasing rats out of the grain sack. Your cousin's widow watches you the entire time, clucking disapproval. You consider suggesting she move in with Marjorie. Then you remember Marjorie hates onions. So, no. That night, it rains. Hard. You pack the children into the driest corner. Your spouse tries to catch drips with a bowl. The pig huddles by the fire like a hairy potato. You curl up beside the hearth, wrapped in damp wool and soggy dignity. Your cousin's widow snores. You stare at the ceiling, watching it leak, and you think, maybe one day I'll build a second room. A wild, luxurious dream. You wake up to bells. Not cheerful bells. Ominous bells. The kind rung in the middle of the night when something bad has happened, or is about to. You throw on a tunic, backwards, you'll realize later, and run barefoot out into the muddy lane, joining the groggy, grumbling trickle of neighbors who also heard the sound. And there, in the center of the village square, stands a figure, the parish priest, holding a torch, beside a smoldering pile of herbs, and staring directly at Joan. You blink. Oh no, not this again. She's a heretic, someone shouts. Witch, another adds, always helpful. You glance at Joan. She's barefoot, clutching a satchel, and looks like someone who just wanted to gather herbs and accidentally summoned judgment. Again, you know Joan. You've shared stew. You've seen her tend sick goats with nothing but boiled moss and whispered prayers. She's odd, yes. Talks to trees, sleeps outside sometimes, claims bees, speak if you're polite. But she's not dangerous. Except now, a few people look convinced otherwise. The priest begins to list her alleged crimes. Healing Marjorie's rash, successfully. Owning too many cats, 3. Missing 2 masses during a thunderstorm. And most damning of all, whistling while walking widdershins around the well. The crowd gasps. You roll your eyes. Historians still argue whether witchcraft accusations were genuine fears or convenient tools to punish women who didn't fit the mold. Healers, widows, midwives, or just people who didn't laugh at the Reeves' jokes. Likely both. Joan defends herself with her usual fire. I healed that rash because Marjorie scratches like a bear. The cats eat your mice. And I only walked widdershins because I was chasing a chicken. The chicken in question squawks support from the shadows. The priest doesn't laugh. You step forward, carefully. You say something vague but calming like, "Surely we all need a healer." Then you throw in a biblical quote you think you remember correctly. Then you compliment the priest's torch-holding skills. Eventually, the tension breaks. They don't burn her. They don't excommunicate her. They just fine her. 3 eggs and a week of church floor sweeping. Joan takes it. Narrowly avoided a dunking. You walk her home in the foggy dark. Both of you silent until she mutters, "I should have hexed the Reeves' foot when I had the chance." You smile. The next day, everything returns to normal, which is to say, deeply strange. The Reeve pretends nothing happened. Marjorie claims her rash is back. And the priest begins a new sermon series about the devil in domestic spaces, which, based on context, might be about Joan's cats. But something's shifted. People look at each other a little more sideways. The jokes are more pointed. The fear of the unknown has a new face. You notice someone burying something behind their house. You notice someone else whispering to the wind. You keep your observations to yourself. Because in a village this small, being too different is dangerous. Even knowing too much is suspicious. That's why you don't talk about your grandmother's dreams, or how your youngest sometimes sings songs in Latin no one taught her, or how, once, the pig stared at the moon for 2 hours and then refused to eat until you gave him rosemary. Best not to mention it. Fringe fact? Some medieval villagers believed that sicknesses were caused by curses, not germs. So instead of medicine, they'd reverse spell the illness, writing prayers backwards, walking backward, or even reciting the Lord's Prayer upside down. You once tried the backward thing. You tripped into a bucket and decided maybe prayer should just stay right side up. Later that week, Joan comes over with a salve for your spouse's back pain. It smells like old onions and mint, but it works. She refuses payment but accepts half a turnip and a piece of bread. You sit together at dusk, watching the smoke drift up from the hearth. She says, "They'll always be afraid of what they don't understand." You nod. "That's why I never explain why the pig understands Latin." She laughs. You do too. The world hasn't changed much. The fear is still there. But so are the people willing to stand up when it counts. And in the end, that's the best kind of magic. You wake up to the sound of bells again. But this time, it's not plague or judgment or even someone's goat in the chapel. It's Sunday again. And that means work. Wait, Sunday? Work? Yes, because in the medieval world, Sundays aren't days off in the way you'd hope. You go to church in the morning, sure. You kneel, you pray, you pretend you're not scratching your ankle under your tunic because the fleas are staging a rebellion. But after that, you go to the fields. Because while the church says rest on the Sabbath, your stomach says, we're one rain away from starvation. And the Lord says, you still owe me half your barley and also your dignity. So you work, you rake, you weed, you restack hay bales that fell over in last night's windstorm. Your spouse mumbles something about the straw demons again. You nod like that's normal. It is. Your back aches, your palms blister, and your knees pop like firewood. But at least you're doing something useful. And honestly, compared to sitting through Father Dunstan's 3-hour sermon on humility and eyebrow sins, manual labor feels like a vacation. And it's not just Sundays. Your weekly rhythm is basically Monday, fieldwork. Tuesday, More field work. Wednesday, same field, new blister. Thursday, churn butter until your arms fall off. Friday, fast, pray and stare at a turnip like it might blink. Saturday, pretend to clean, actually panic. Sunday, church, guilt, then back to the field. There's no such thing as a weekend. Rest is reserved for saints, nobles, and the dead. Even your so-called rest days, like feast days or holy days, are just work in fancier clothing. You sweep the church, decorate with wilted herbs, light candles, sing songs, pretend to know the Latin parts, and try not to yawn during the homily. And when there's a festival, sure, you get to dance around a pole or throw things at a target. But first you have to butcher, bake, decorate, kneel for hours, clean everything, and pretend you enjoy being in close quarters with sweaty people, banging tambourines. Work is worship. Worship is work. And don't even get started on the fields. You tend not only your own strip, which, to be honest, looks more like a thread than a farm, but also the Lord's land, the domain, the big plot that doesn't feed your family, but does feed your obligation. On those days, you do extra work for no extra food. You smile politely when the steward inspects your furrows. You try not to notice that he rides a horse while you're knee-deep in mud and grumbling. Historians still argue whether peasants internalized this labor as divine duty or just did what they had to in order to survive. Some evidence suggests a mix. People sang while they worked, cursed creatively, and occasionally staged small, poorly organized protests involving livestock and pointy sticks. You daydream about leading one. Then you step in a cowpat and forget what you were angry about. Lunch is late and sad. Boiled beans, stale bread, a lick of garlic butter someone dropped on a leaf. You chew slowly, watching clouds drift and wondering if it's going to rain again. Spoiler, it is. Back to work. In the afternoon, the sun finally breaks through, turning the field gold. Birds sing. A breeze rolls over the grain. For one brief moment, the dirt smells sweet, and your aching muscles feel strong, and the world, though small, is enough. Then your spouse yells that the pig is eating the butter again, and you trip over a rake. The moment's over. That night, your hands won't unclench. You try soaking them in warm water, but the bucket leaks. You wrap them in cloth and lean against the hearth. Your youngest brings you a bug and says it's your new helper. You thank them. You name it Edgar. Edgar lives on your shoulder now. Fringe fact? In some communities, peasants believed animals could take on sacred duties. A cat who guarded the grain was considered blessed. A cow that calved on Easter was a sign of good fortune. And a bug that didn't bite you was probably a tiny angel. Edgar doesn't bite. You're keeping him. You drift off beside the fire, clothes still dirty, back still sore, feet throbbing. But tomorrow, you'll do it all again. Because if work is life, then maybe, just maybe, the blisters are your blessings. You wake up and your hands are already sore. You didn't do anything yet. They're just sore out of principle, as if they've seen what's coming and want to file a complaint ahead of time. It's Monday, again, which means it's time to thank God you're alive, curse gently under your breath, and head to the fields. But not your fields. Not today. Today you're working the church's land. See, you owe your labor to a lot of people. Your lord, the manor, the reeve's endless list of obligations. But you also owe it to God, or at least to the church, which has a habit of reminding you they're not quite the same thing, but also kind of are. So off you go to till, weed, and reap for the parish. For free. You squint at the sun, roll your shoulders, and haul a hoe that feels heavier every year. You trudge past Joan, who's muttering to herself about slugs. You wave at the blacksmith's apprentice, who's clearly been roped into this by accident and is reconsidering all of his life choices. You reach the plot of land behind the chapel and sigh. It's overgrown, rocky, slightly cursed looking. Perfect. You begin. The soil is hard, the sun is hot, and Father Dunstan is watching from the steps of the church with a cup of wine and the air of a man who thinks suffering is noble, as long as it's someone else's. You dig. You sweat. You repeat. By mid-morning, you're already halfway to a backache and contemplating whether becoming a hermit is a viable career path. Historians still argue whether these church lands were truly managed by divine order or just a clever way to get extra labor out of peasants. The result was the same. You worked them, you didn't profit, and in return, you got blessings, which are famously not edible. Still, working for the church isn't the worst part of your religious obligations. There's also chanting. Every holy day, of which there are many, you're expected to attend services, stand through long readings in Latin, and join in the bits you sort of remember. The melodies are simple but repetitive. You mumble along like a reluctant bumblebee. Occasionally, you're asked to participate in a procession, which means walking slowly in a line while carrying something mildly symbolic, a candle, a cross, a slightly damp banner. You shuffle through the village while trying not to step in dung or drop your incense stick. Last week, you dropped your incense stick. It rolled under the pig. The procession paused. Father Dunstan gave you a look. You haven't been asked to hold anything since. Then there's penance. You go to confession, nervously, always, and admit your sins, which usually include impure thoughts, you're human, skipping mass once because of a goat emergency, swearing when you stubbed your toe, that time you pretended to fast, but actually ate a sausage in the woods. The priest nods solemnly, assigns your penance, usually prayers, sometimes fasting, once sweeping the chapel floor while singing Psalm 23, and sends you on your way. Sometimes, you wonder if he confesses his own sins. Then you remember the wine and the smug smile. Probably not. In the evenings you pray, you kneel on the cold floor beside your hearth, mumble your Hail Marys, and thank the saints for getting you through another day. You ask Saint Isidore for strong crops, Saint Apollonia for tooth pain, Saint Roche, always for plague protection. Fringe fact. Some medieval peasants had their own personal saints, based on local legends or family traditions. One woman you knew swore by Saint Wolfram of the Muddy Boot. You never found him in any official book, but her feet stayed dry for 2 winters, so who's to argue? Sometimes your prayers feel automatic. Other times, they feel like the only thing standing between you and collapse. Your faith is woven into everything. The food you eat, the days you rest, the way you swear, always including at least one saint's name. Even your work is framed as divine duty. You don't resent it, not exactly. You just get tired. And tonight, you're very tired. You wash the dirt from your arms with cold water, change into your least smelly tunic, and sit by the fire with your spouse. They're mending socks. You're trying to remember if you said enough prayers to cover last week's grumbling about the reeve. The kids are asleep. The pig is snoring. You stare into the flames. Do you think the saints ever get bored? You ask. Your spouse looks up. Of listening to people like us? You nod. Probably. But they don't complain. You chuckle. They're holier than me. They also don't have to weed the church garden. You both laugh softly. The fire pops. Your knees crack as you shift. You whisper one last prayer into the quiet, just in case. Then you close your eyes and let the saints carry the rest. You wake up angry, not the usual tired muttering, not the low grumble about sore joints and another day in the muck. No, this morning, something in you snaps. You're tired of the cold stew, tired of the reeve's smug face, tired of owing work for land you barely own, grain you barely grow, and a life that doesn't feel like yours. You step outside and find your neighbor John, also scowling. "We need to talk," he says. You nod. You both know. Everyone knows. Because yesterday, the steward came through with new orders. Increased labor obligations on the domain, higher grain levies, regardless of harvest, and, this is the kicker, no more pigs in common pasture. Sir Oinksalot is devastated. So are you. You gather that evening in the tavern, or what passes for one, a dark corner of the mill where people drink weak ale and whisper with purpose. The words are soft at first, uncertain, but then they catch fire. We break our backs so he can eat roast goose every night. He raised Jews again and hasn't even visited in 3 years. Marjorie's boy died building a fence for his hunting dogs. No one says the word revolt. Not at first, but the feeling is there. You drink your ale, you watch the others, you listen, and you remember things. You remember Wat Tyler, the man who led a rising not so long ago. The stories spread faster than fire. Peasants marching to London, demanding fair taxes, fair wages, fair treatment. For a moment, it seemed like the world might turn upside down. Then he was killed. The king smiled. The promises vanished. Still, for a while it felt possible. Historians still argue whether the peasants' revolt changed anything, or if it simply scared the nobility into pretending they'd learned a lesson. Either way, you remember what it felt like to hope. The next morning, the mood shifts. People move differently. They look each other in the eye a little longer. Tools are sharpened not just for farming, but just in case. The reeve notices. He asks questions, gets no answers. You dig in the fields, but keep an ear to the road. Then it happens. A tax collector arrives, riding in like he's the king's cousin, demanding full grain levies now, not later, or else. He waves parchment. He sneers, and someone throws a turnip. It hits him square in the chest. The silence afterward is enormous. Then Joan steps forward and says, "That's all you're getting." You expect punishment, fines, whipping. But the collector sees the crowd forming, dozens of peasants with hard faces and farm tools, and suddenly decides to reconsider. He leaves, fast. That night, you sit by the fire, still buzzing with it. That moment, when no one backed down, when 100 years of fear melted in the face of shared anger. It was just a turnip, but it felt like thunder. Still, the aftermath is quieter than you'd expect. No grand rebellion, no march on the manor, just more silence. A few missing chickens, one broken fence, nothing that can be proven. But the steward doesn't return for weeks. The reeve keeps his distance, and no one stops your pigs from grazing anymore. Fringe fact? In some areas after uprisings, lords quietly reduced dues without admitting fault, offering seasonal leniencies or temporary adjustments that lasted for years. They feared another revolt more than they wanted revenge. You don't talk about it directly, you just notice the change. People laugh a little louder, work a little slower, hold their heads a little higher. The fields are still hard, the taxes are still unfair. But now there's something else. A line that was drawn and crossed and not forgotten. You lie down that night, exhausted but warm. You dream of turnips and freedom. You wake to frost on your lashes and a silence so thick it feels like the world is holding its breath. Winter has arrived, not the crisp postcard kind, but the wet wool wrapped around your soul kind. You can see your breath as you sit up. So can the pig. He grunts, unimpressed. You pull the blanket tighter, though blanket is generous. It's a matted mass of wool, straw, and someone's old cloak stitched with love and regret. Your children are curled like commas near the hearth, which is down to one glowing coal. You nudge it. It dies. Good morning. Winter in the village means survival mode. Everything slows, everything aches, and food becomes both obsession and currency. You rise and immediately regret it. Your knees sound like two rocks grinding together. Your back has questions. Your fingers are already numb, and you haven't even reached the door yet. Outside, the world is white. Not a magical, snow globe white, but a grim, slushy, grey white that soaks through shoes and ambition. The wind doesn't howl, it insults. You check the grain bin. Bad news. Not enough. Worse news. Mice agree. You grab a broom and chase them like a one-person war band. One gets away, probably goes to tell its friends. Breakfast is a hot bowl of, well, hot water with imagination. You scrape the last of the dried peas into the pot and add a hint of turnip. Not a whole turnip, just essence of turnip. Turnip-adjacent memories. You serve it in chipped bowls. Everyone pretends to chew. Historians still argue whether the medieval hungry gap hit hardest in January or February. But the truth is, winter was always brutal. Crops were gone. Preservation methods were limited. Salted fish, if you had salt. Smoked meat, if you had meat. Most days it was pottage, again, or nothing. But you endure. You sew patches onto patches. You wrap your feet in rags. You take turns sleeping nearest the fire. You ration everything, food, fuel, hope. And still, you find moments of warmth. A neighbor shares a heel of bread. Your cousin's widow knits mittens for the children, but not for you. You suspect lingering grudge. Joan brings a salve for frostbite made of goose fat, ash, and possibly stubbornness. Fringe fact? Some peasants used heated bricks wrapped in cloth as primitive bed warmers. You try this with a rock. It's warm for 5 minutes. Then it just becomes a rock again. Work doesn't stop, of course. The animals still need feeding. Tools need mending. And you still owe winter duties to the manor, like clearing snow from paths, fetching firewood, or, last week, spending 6 hours untangling a noble's decorative garlands from a deer. You try not to ask why a deer was near the garlands. You already know the answer will annoy you. The church becomes both a refuge and a reminder. You huddle there on feast days, grateful for warmth, but wary of sermons that suggest suffering is a blessing. Father Dunstan speaks of purification. You think of chilblains. You whisper extra prayers to St. Bridget. She understands cold. On the darkest nights, you tell stories. Not just Bible ones, though you know plenty of those. You tell tales of brave peasants, kind saints, clever foxes, and kings who disguise themselves and fall in love with shepherds. Your youngest insists the fox is the hero every time. You don't argue. You also sing. Not well, not loudly, but enough. A few old songs passed down from someone's grandmother. Lyrics about bread, moonlight, and things you've never seen. Green fields with flowers that never die. Rivers that sing lullabies. Cows that never get sick. For a moment, your voice fills the room like heat, and everyone listens, even the pig. One night, a stranger knocks on your door. Tall, hooded, freezing. You pause. You glance at your spouse. Then, without a word, you open the door. You offer soup, such as it is, and a place near the fire. The stranger nods, thanks, says little, and falls asleep sitting upright. Your children stare. You shrug. Sometimes hospitality is all you have to give. In the morning, the stranger is gone, but the fire is burning stronger than it should be. And someone patched your torn glove while you slept. You don't question it. You just keep going, because that's winter, not comfort, not joy, but endurance. And sometimes, when you least expect it, a spark. You wake up coughing, not the "I slept near the hearth and swallowed ash" kind. This one's deeper, sticky. It rattles around in your chest like a mouse in a jug. You sit up slowly. Your bones feel cold from the inside out. Someone nearby is sneezing. Someone else groans. The air in the one-room house is thick. Smoke, sweat, wet wool, and something else. Sickness. Not again. You glance around. Your youngest is pale. Your spouse is flushed. Even the pig looks anxious, and that's not a phrase you thought you'd ever use. This isn't your first winter fever. It won't be the last. You just hope it's the kind that passes like a rude guest, and not the kind that settles in like a curse. You go through the motions, warm water if you can, herbs if you have any. You boil onion skins, dried mint, and something that smells like regret. You ladle it into mouths that don't want to open. Then you wait. Sickness in a medieval village is like a thief. It takes what it wants, when it wants, and leaves you guessing. Was it the bad air? Was it the mouldy bread? Was it just your turn? Historians still argue whether peasant illnesses were truly random or if the cramped, damp, unhygienic conditions made them inevitable. Spoiler, it's both. You do what you can. You hang rosemary near the door. You light juniper and let the smoke curl under beds. You mutter prayers to Saint Sebastian, patron of plagues, and Saint Apollonia. Even though this isn't a tooth issue, you're just covering your bases. Fringe fact? Some villagers believed sickness could be absorbed by objects. They'd place bread on a fevered brow, then bury it far from the village. You try it once. The dog digs it up. He's fine. You are not. The worst part isn't even the sickness. It's the helplessness. You watch your spouse toss in sleep, murmuring nonsense. You press cool cloths to their forehead. You whisper reassurances you don't believe. The fire burns low. So does your hope. Outside, the wind howls like it's laughing. But still, you endure. Neighbors drop by, quietly, carefully. Joan brings a pouch of something foul-smelling and tells you to brew it strong. You don't ask what's in it. You just nod. Marjorie sends over a crust of bread. It's hard as a brick, but it's warm from her oven. You cry anyway. Even the Reeve, yes, the Reeve, pauses near your door and leaves a handful of dried apples. No words, just the offering. People may bicker, may gossip, may throw turnips at taxmen, but when sickness comes, something older than grudges stirs. Solidarity. You sleep in shifts. You chew mint to stay awake. You sing old lullabies, even though your voice cracks. You talk to the pig. He listens. Days blur. The fever breaks. Your spouse wakes up drenched in sweat and blinking like a newborn lamb. You offer water. They drink it. You offer bread. They eat half. You let yourself breathe. The children recover too. Slower than you'd like, but better than you'd feared. One of them coughs into a bucket and then announces he's now a priest. You decide not to question that yet. You step outside for the first time in days. The village is quiet. Not everyone was as lucky. You attend a funeral, a child. You don't know the family well, but you bring a strip of linen and a candle. The chapel is full of quiet faces and red eyes. The priest speaks of eternal rest. You think of small hands and fevered cheeks and mothers who can't stop shaking. You return home and hug your children a little too tightly. They squirm. You don't let go. That night, the fire burns a little brighter. The soup is slightly thicker. The air feels, if not clean, then at least lighter. You're not out of danger, not by a long shot, but you survived. And in a world where sickness comes like wolves and mercy comes in spoons, that's more than enough. You lie beside your spouse, listening to the even sound of their breath. For the first time in a week, it doesn't wheeze. You whisper thanks to every saint you can name, and one you probably made up. Then you close your eyes and let the quiet carry you. You wake to birdsong, real, actual birdsong. Not a sick child coughing in rhythm, or the pig sneezing dramatically, but honest-to-goodness chirping from something feathered and alive. You blink at the sunlight trickling through the cracks in the wooden shutters. There's warmth on your face. Not fire warmth, not body heat from sick sleeping people warmth. Actual sun. You smile before your bones even creak, because this morning the frost is gone, the wind has lost its bite, and outside the fields look alive. It's spring. Now don't get ahead of yourself. That doesn't mean comfort or leisure or floral crowns. It means mud, slippery, endless, shoe-eating mud, and work. So much work your fingers ache just thinking about it. But it also means hope. You stretch, you wince, you start the fire, you feed the pig, who is insulted you forgot his name yesterday. Sir oinks a lot, always. Then you wake the children, who groan like tiny ghosts. You step outside, and there it is. Green, tiny shoots pushing up through the thawed earth. Bees buzzing around too early, like overachievers. Joan waving with both hands and shouting something about worm tea. The new year begins here, in the dirt. You start by ploughing, if you're lucky enough to borrow the manor's oxen. Otherwise, it's you, your spouse, and a plough you swear was designed by a sadist. The soil clumps, the furrows wobble. You hit something hard, probably an ancient curse or a forgotten spoon. Still, progress. Spring means sowing barley. It means fixing fences, mending tools, digging drainage ditches that immediately fill with water because water hates you. But you work anyway, because this season, it decides everything. A good spring means a chance at a full stomach. A bad one means watching your children eat nettle soup and pretending it's stew. Historians still argue whether spring offered true renewal or just another round of exhausting labor. You can confirm it's both, but the exhaustion tastes sweeter when it's tinged with possibility. You pause to wipe your brow and notice your spouse talking to the newly arrived tinker, who promises his knives are sharper, his stories taller, and his beard more blessed than any in the Shire. You buy a spoon. He throws in a riddle for free. That night, you gather near the fire and plan. Not dream. Peasants don't dream. You plan. You mark out rows in your head. Count seed bags. Debate how many turnips one family can eat before turning into turnips. Fringe fact: some villagers believed eating too many root vegetables in spring could make you earthbound, slow-witted, heavy-hearted, pulled toward the grave. So they drank cleansing teas made from nettles and wild garlic. You try this. It tastes like regret and burns like betrayal. But after, you feel oddly alert. The next day, the village comes alive. Children shriek in the mud. The reeve trips over a chicken. Father Dunstan tries to hold mass outdoors, but keeps losing his pages in the wind. Joan plants a protective circle of leeks. The blacksmith dances when he thinks no one's looking. It's not that the hardship is gone. The debts are still due. The Lord still looms. But spring brings something that's been missing for months. Momentum. You move, you plant, you mend, you joke with your neighbors, gently, sarcastically. You tease the butcher for cutting bread like meat. You help Marjorie's boy build a bird trap that catches nothing but twigs. You feel lighter. Like the air. Like the days. Like the possibility that this year, maybe, the world won't collapse around you. Not entirely. That night, your youngest places a daisy on your pillow. You pretend not to notice. You sleep with it pressed against your cheek like armor. And when you wake again, to birdsong and the smell of damp earth, you don't sigh. You smile. Because spring hasn't saved you, but it's trying. You wake to heat. Not the smothering, airless kind, not yet, but the kind that sticks to your skin before you even rise. The kind that turns breath into sweat and makes your tunic feel like it's plotting against you. It's summer now. You know because the chores start before sunrise and still don't finish until stars peek out like disapproving parents. You stand in the doorway of your cottage, holding your hoe like a weapon against a long day. The pig is already wallowing. Joan is shouting at her geese. Somewhere, someone has broken a cartwheel again. You mutter your morning prayer. It's short, mostly a request for tolerable weather and an absence of blisters. You get neither, because summer, dear listener, is not a vacation. It's the war season for medieval peasants. Your enemy? Time, rain, sun, hunger. Reapers who nap too long, chickens with attitudes, and weeds, always weeds. Today is haymaking. You cut grass in the Lord's meadows, which sounds poetic until your scythe blade dulls for the third time and your knees beg for retirement. You work in rows, sun burning your shoulders, the air humming with insects and curses. Everyone's sweating, everyone's grumbling, but you keep going. Because hay means winter food for animals, and animals mean manure, and manure means crops. It's the cycle of life, only sweatier. You pile the hay into mounds, shape it into cocks, yes, really, and then you rake, and rake, and rake. By midday, you can no longer feel your hands. By evening, you can feel everything. But hay is only the start. Next comes the grain harvest. Barley first, then oats, then rye, and, if you're fancy, wheat. You cut the stalks with a sickle, bending, slicing, bundling. It's rhythm and precision and back pain all at once. The manor steward watches like a hawk. He counts your bundles. He inspects your cuts. He sighs when you sneeze. You briefly daydream about burying him in straw. Historians still argue whether peasants took pride in this backbreaking work, or if they simply endured it to survive. Maybe it's both. You do your best. You hum a tune, you curse creatively, and sometimes you feel a flicker of something close to pride, until your scythe catches a rock and flings it into your shin. You cry. Joan laughs. You forgive her by lunch. Speaking of lunch, it's coarse bread, an onion, and a bit of salted fish, if you're lucky. If not, it's just bread. If you're truly cursed, it's imaginary. One time you ate raw turnips for a week, and your stomach staged a rebellion. There's no shade in the fields, no breeze, just the sun, heavy and arrogant, pressing down like it owns the place. You drink water from a shared jug that tastes vaguely of iron and everyone's hands. You don't complain, much. Evenings bring threshing, beating grain heads to separate the seeds from the chaff. You use flails and a floor of packed earth. It's loud, messy, brutal, therapeutic. Then comes winnowing, tossing grain in the air so the wind blows away the husks. It's oddly beautiful. Dust floats like gold in the fading light. For a moment, you pretend you're rich. Then the wind changes and you get chaff in your eye. Fringe fact. Some villages had communal threshing songs designed to keep rhythm and morale. One of yours includes questionable lyrics about a bishop, a pig, and a very unholy bucket. You sing it anyway, because summer's rhythm is relentless, but also sacred. The land gives now. If you keep up, you'll eat come winter. If not, well, you've seen what happens. One bad storm, one missed bundle, one rotting stack of hay, and the dominoes fall fast. Still, even in the toil, there are moments. A shared laugh over a spilled water jug. A child catching grasshoppers and declaring herself queen of the field. A sunset that paints everything gold and makes your sore muscles feel noble. You collapse at night beside your spouse, both of you smelling like dust and effort. They smile at you with straw in their hair. You don't bother brushing it away. You whisper your gratitude, not because life is easy, but because today you endured. And tomorrow, you'll rise with the sun and do it all again, because summer doesn't wait. You wake to the scent of apples and smoke. It's that fleeting moment between summer's toil and winter's test. The air is crisp but not cruel. The leaves whisper secrets in golden tongues. And you, tired soul that you are, finally get to reap what you've sown. It's autumn, and that means it's time to gather. Everywhere you look, something needs picking, drying, smoking, salting, storing, or hiding from mice. The village becomes a hive, baskets swinging, fires smoking, carts creaking, children sticky with juice and pride. Today, you're picking apples. Your arms ache from reaching, your back creaks from bending. Your fingers are nicked from thorns, but the fruit is sweet, tart and crisp, the kind that makes you close your eyes when you bite. You fill baskets until your arms shake. One goes to the manor, of course, first fruits, always. The rest you'll stew, dry, or crush into cider that tastes like heaven and regret. Later comes bean pulling, nut gathering, cabbage hauling, and the great turnip excavation. The turnips seem bigger this year. You wonder if the pig's been whispering encouragement to them. Then, the final harvest. The grain left drying in the fields, the last bundles of flax, the stubborn leeks that refuse to be pulled in summer. You feel something ancient rising in you, something tied to the earth, to timing, to survival. This isn't just work. It's a reckoning. The fields are quiet now, but not dead. They're watching, waiting to see how you'll handle the fruit of their labor. Historians still argue whether medieval harvests were celebrated communally or privately. In your village, it's both, because after weeks of hauling, drying, threshing and storing, there comes the harvest feast. And oh, how you look forward to it. Every family brings what they can. A loaf of nut bread, a wheel of sharp cheese, boiled eggs, dried berries, roasted onions, and yes, one proud goose whose absence has gone noticeably unmentioned. The table groans, so do your chairs. You eat with both hands and all your teeth, which you're suddenly grateful to still have. You drink cider until your ears buzz. You sing until your voice gives out. You even dance, a limping, laughing, wheezing dance, but a dance all the same. Joan plays the fiddle. Marjorie taps a spoon against a pot. Father Dunstan claps exactly off beat. The children run in circles. The old ones watch with damp eyes. There is joy here. Not luxury, not peace, but something stronger, relief. The year was hard. The crops were just enough. The rats didn't eat everything. The Lord didn't raise Jews again. The plague didn't come. The saints didn't ignore you completely. You made it. The fire crackles. You tell stories, the old ones, the funny ones, the ones that aren't quite true, but get better every year. Fringe fact? Some peasants believe the spirit of the grain, called the corn mother or barley man, lived in the last sheaf harvested, so they decorate it, dance with it, and place it in a place of honor. This year, you gave it a hat. The pig tried to eat it. You compromised with a shelf. That night, full and sleepy, you walk home under a sky full of stars. Your spouse wraps an arm around you. The children sing nonsense songs. You feel your belly, round and satisfied. You sleep like someone who won a battle. Because in a way, you did. You defeated hunger, for now. You tamed the land, for now. You bought yourself a little time. You lie in bed and stare at the rafters. Winter will come again, but not tonight. Tonight you are fed, you are warm, and for once, you don't have to worry. You wake to quiet. Not the heavy hush of winter, not the crackling chorus of harvest, but a stillness that feels full. The kind of quiet that holds breath, like the world is waiting. There's no urgent knocking, no chores screaming your name, no thunder of hooves or squeals of swine. Just the soft stir of wind against thatched roof and the whisper of your own steady heart. You sit up slowly. Your bones pop as always. The hearth is out as always. The pig is snoring upside down as rarely happens. But still, something's different. You're not racing to plant, not dragging to reap, not running from sickness, not bowing to orders. Today, you pause, and you look around your entire year, now stretched behind you like a long dirt path worn down by time and boot soles. You remember planting seeds with cracked hands and hope no bigger than a pea. You remember weeding in the rain, bent and bitter, muttering to worms. You remember feast days filled with borrowed candles and burnt onions and children laughing with bread crusts in their hair. You remember burying someone kind, someone who deserved more. You remember rebellion, not with swords, but with silence and unity and one very well-thrown turnip. You remember hunger and sickness and dancing and singing and jokes about Father Dunstan's hairline. You remember surviving. Historians still argue whether peasant life was misery or meaning, whether the toil crushed the soul or carved it into something solid. You lie on your straw-filled mattress and decide. Maybe it did both. Maybe it made you. Fringe fact. Some villagers believed that if you whispered your memories into the wind at the end of harvest, the land would remember them and bless your next season. Tonight, you think you'll try that. You've got a few memories worth planting. You step outside. The sun is low, casting long shadows across empty fields and moss-covered stones. Smoke curls from distant chimneys. You can smell stew on the air, hear laughter from the millhouse, see Joan trying to teach a goose to curtsy. The world is still turning. And you're still in it. Not as a lord, not as a priest, not as a hero, but as you. A peasant, a parent, a person. Someone who took what the world gave, no matter how crooked, how cold, how cursed, and built something human from it. You light the fire, you stir the pot, you mend a shoe, you kiss a forehead, you hum a tune you don't remember learning. And when the stars begin to prick the sky, you sit by the door with a cup of warm cider, a crust of bread, and a full heart. Because tonight, you rest. The chores can wait. The world can wait. You made it through the plagues, through the lords, through the famine, through the cold, through the aching, breaking, never-ending rhythm of survival. And now, finally, the year releases you. You watch the wind dance across the grass. You whisper a story into it, and the land listens. Word count, 1,130. Wind down, 300 words. So now, your eyes are heavy. The fire's just embers now, soft red breathing beneath the ash. The air is cool, but not cruel, and you're safe in your tiny home, wrapped in wool and sleep and the distant scent of apples. Let the wind blow, let the stars turn. You've done your part. Tonight, the world is gentler. Tonight, you've earned stillness. Let the aches of the day melt into dreams. Let the sounds of labor fade into silence. There's nothing left to reap, nothing left to sow, just a quiet field and a warm place to rest. The rain will come again, yes. The frost, the tax, the worry, but not now. Now, your breath is slow. Now, your hands are still. Now, the past year sinks into the soil of memory. And you rest, fully, finally. Because surviving wasn't easy. Because living wasn't guaranteed. Because in a world built to bend you, you stayed upright. Maybe a little hunched, maybe a little tired, but here. The crows sleep, the oxen sleep, the pig snores again, and you drift. Past the field, past the chapel, past the hayrick and the hedge, past everything heavy, into peace. Sleep well, peasant, you've earned it.